perspective. Professor Tapia has just published a book called Barrio Gangs of San Antonio, 1915 to 2015. Professor Tapia, welcome to Fronteras of Changing America.
Thank you for having me, Emilio.
What first attracted you to working with gangs and also just gang history?
Well, my first job out of college in San Antonio, I went to St. Mary's University, and I went to the job board after graduating as a political science major, didn't know what I would do, found a job description about gang intervention, got the job, and that was in the mid to late 90s, and that just allowed me to immerse myself in that whole world of Chicano street gangs in another city, but that's where I got my start.
Well, you grew up in El Paso.
I did.
Was there much gang activity growing up for you?
Yeah, I think I would say so, and that has been the case historically. And I'm from the Lower Valley in Isleta, which is pretty well known for lots of that sort of thing.
How far back did you go in studying gangs? You went to 1915. Why was that such a pivotal year?
It's really just when I felt it got its start in studying the archives, newspaper archives mostly, and it just seemed to be just about when it turned into a more of a serious social problem for the city of San Antonio, and that was just reflected in those records.
How did those gangs initially start?
That's probably the crux of the work itself is just to see, theoretically, where do these gangs form? How do they get their started? So, I mean, it's what you would kind of idyllically see in a movie like The Gangs of New York or something like that, kind of like unsupervised street corner play groups, really, back in that day.
And where did those groups migrate from? Were they originally from Mexico? Were they long multi-generations in San Antonio?
I would say that they are native to Texas. Of course, the origins, the ethnic and national origins of the boys, street corner boys in that day, were Mexicanos. But no, I mean, for the most part, they were all born on the Texas side of the border.
Let's talk about peak activity for gangs. You studied from 1915. Were there any peaks between 1915 and 2015?
There were two really clear, identifiable peaks, which was about the early 50s. Really the whole decade of the 50s, but early 50s seemed to be pretty profound. And then throughout the decade of the 90s, really starting in the late 80s, early 90s was horrific. 1993 is really the peak of all violence in the United States, and gangs included. And aside from those two others, there's been fluctuations, but those are the clear peaks.
Let's talk about the 50s. What caused there to be a peak in the 50s?
That's an interesting question. I mean, it's hard to say. I interviewed men that were early teens in the 50s, and I mean, as a teenager, I guess it's hard to analyze what's going on. But I think just the lack of things to do, really, like the lack of recreational activities, a critical mass of young boys, in the inner city at that time, and that's just a simple fact of our discipline, is that when you have such a large age group, mixing it up in any society, well, there's going to be a lot of friction.
Was there a lot of racial divide in San Antonio in the 50s that caused them to want to separate themselves from other communities?
Yes. I wouldn't say that they separated themselves, although some might argue that, but I think it's more of a structural thing, in cities. The way they're laid out is they tend to, be segregated along the lines of race and class, and those two things stick pretty closely together. So whether it's out of preference or out of kind of design, larger structural design, you hear stories about crossing the this side of the tracks or that side of the tracks. Yeah, that was very much the case in San Antonio.
Let's talk about the 90s. What caused there to be such a peak in the 90s, and not just the peak, but violence? It was pretty violent in the 90s.
Right. So in my work, in the 20, some years that I've spent studying Chicano gangs, I've talked to a lot of gang cops, right? Gang detectives and so on. And some of the best ones will really, really attest to the influence of media. Rap music, gangster rap music had such a profound impact in their mind. And it's pretty undeniable, right? Just what it did to the psyches of kids, what it
It popularized it.
big time. It ghettoized a lot of inner cities in terms of just the thought processes, the culture, the language, and it glorifies, extreme violence, right? And then